Martin Vagabula, Falcher Ashkin Blogacum, your Falcher how ac yn channel seo, Smithfield Ernich, agus Hamishib a Frecker, the Reish, and Kesh and Quora, Mian, and Gaelic. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. If you like this content, check out other content. I do a range of different video styles. This is another instalment of Reddit Answers Quora's questions about Scottish Gaelic. What was I was going to say, welcome back if you're new, make sure to like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. I've been watching too much YouTube. So yes, as I said, I'm Rachel, and I'm answering the questions that Quora has about Scottish Gaelic. This is not my first such instalment. So, I'm taking these questions from the Quora space Scottish Gaelic in brackets language. I'm not sure how some of the questions that I found in here ended up there, and as always I will say don't go looking in these Quora spaces if you're a Gaelic speaker unless you're feeling particularly emotionally stable today. I know as Gaelic speakers we deal with a lot of annoying, frustrating, ignorant, racist comments about Gaelic. I could keep going. And we deal with it unsolicited in real life and on other forms of social media, so you don't need to go seeking it out. Some of the questions are dodgy, a lot of them are okay. The answers, eesh. So yeah, check Quora at your own risk. Anyway, Keshtihan and G. How would Irish or Scottish Gaelic translators deal with non-Gaelic names that can be either rendered into a Gaelic name or simply re-spelt in Gaelic? It varies. If there's maybe a dozen names for each gender that have very common equivalents, like Rernich and Rachel, Alistair, Anus, Katrina, Yalosach, Mary, names like that, it's very, very common for those names to just be spelt the Gaelic one put in there. Even when you're speaking to someone, it's very common for them to just assume that you want to be called by one or the other depending on what language you're speaking and not depending on what name you've told them to use. So those sorts of names generally get put into the Gaelic. Same for surnames. If it's like a Mac surname or a common Scottish surname, and there's usually a Gaelic original form or a Gaelic version of it, they will often be used. But outside of those situations, usually it's just left as it is, from what I've seen. What is very uncommon for a translator or a journalist is to simply respell a name. And I know that there are a lot of Gaelic learners out there who want to know how to spell their names in Gaelic and respell it and have their respelled names on Facebook. And that's something that a lot of native speakers don't do and often try to discourage, because what happens is that the Gaelic phonology, the sounds of Gaelic are not exactly the same as the sounds of English. And the phonotactics, what sounds are allowed to be next to each other, are not the same as English. So what you end up with is writing something in Gaelic that might break Gaelic phonotactics. So it's not a series of sounds that would be allowed to be next to each other in Gaelic. Or at the least, it spells something that sounds sort of like what the English name it's trying to spell, but doesn't completely. So it's sort of not exactly exact from that standpoint, but also people can usually look at it and know what name it's trying to say, or what English word it's trying to say, and pronounce it just like the English word rather than pronouncing it according to what the spelling rules say it should be pronounced, which is problematic. For one, that defeats the purpose of respelling the name in the first place. But for another, it gradually sort of wears away at the rules of Gaelic pronunciation, because we get very used to seeing words that look Gaelic and pronouncing them with English phonology and English phonotactics, which can sort of cause problems in the language, and As a language, it's already facing some issues from external pressures, so yeah, best not to add to them. So, for that reason, it's often discouraged to simply respell names, and I haven't seen a journalist or a reputable place like that doing that to names that appear in news stories. But as far as, like, if you've got someone called Catherine McCaskill, then yes, that will almost certainly be translated in whatever is being translated as Catriona Nichgaskill. Ceist ra. What does glas mean in Gaelic? Glas means gloss. On the colour wheel, it overlaps with things that in English are called green, grey and blue, but it doesn't overlap completely with the different colours that are designated by green, grey and blue, so you can't exactly translate it as any one of them, but depending on the context of what you're referring to, it could translate as any one of them. Basically, colours and the spectrum of light is not naturally cut up into discrete chunks. You know, it is a spectrum from one shade to the other, and it's very culturally subjective where you put the boundaries between each colour designation, each colour category name. So yeah, glass, it means glass, and depending on context, it could mean a particular shade that in English might be a shade of blue, green or grey. Ceist a trí and you. Can a native Irish speaker speak Scottish Gaelic? Yes, I know a native Irish speaker who speaks Scottish Gaelic, but if this is meant, like, categorically, can native Irish speakers speak Scottish Gaelic? No. Can a native English speaker speak Scots? No. Some do. Some don't. Many don't. If the question is, can they understand Scottish Gaelic, and can they speak something that will be understood by a Scottish Gaelic speaker? Absolutely. But they don't usually speak Scottish Gaelic themselves. It is possible for them to learn, but they tend to have a unique set of challenges for learning Scottish Gaelic that someone who doesn't speak Irish wouldn't have. The different biases and assumptions about what words mean, how the grammar works, how to pronounce things and so on. They have like a whole different set of first language interference than an English speaker or like an English only speaker would have. And often because it's so close to their first language, it makes it harder to overcome those biases because they can understand Scottish Gaelic a lot of the time without having to specifically set out to learn it. And the same goes for Scottish Gaelic speakers speaking Irish. Ceist a céid. Is there any word that is common to every Celtic language, e.g. Welsh, Breton, Cornish, Irish Gaelic, Manx or Gaelic? That is all the languages, and I'm a bit fascinated by how they've been named. Like, why are we just saying Gaelic instead of Scottish Gaelic? Why are we saying Irish Gaelic but then Manx and then Gaelic? Why are we not putting an I or an accent on Gaelic? These are not answering the question, but like, these are the questions that are coming to me. Is there any word that's common to all of them? Bearing in mind that we have different orthographies, which is different ways of spelling things, the first word that springs to my mind is Arving, or Avon, which means river. So it's Arving in Scottish Gaelic. In Irish, they tend to pronounce it like Arling, and then in Cornish and Welsh it's Avon, and that just means river, and that's a word that is common to all the languages. There's a lot more words that share a common root, like Mach for sun and Map for sun. There's this is the main sound change between the two branches, which is why they're called P Celtic and Q Celtic. Ceithid and Pedu, which I've been told repeatedly I pronounce very incorrectly for Welsh, but whatever. I don't speak Welsh, I've mentioned that. I can say, I've been trying to learn Cornish and I've forgotten the Welsh I knew. I can sing the chorus of Callan Lan, which I won't do now, but that's the extent of my Welsh. Dwyn hoffi sglodion. Anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of words that are very similar, a lot of words that are almost identical, but yeah, we'll stick with that. There's Avon, there you go, it's a word that's common to all the Celtic languages. Ceist a coig. What linguistic processes made Gaelic sound so different from the way it is written? Very beautifully put question, and I suspect being asked by someone with a lot of bias against the way Gaelic is spelt. First I just need to, I mean, they may be legitimately asking about the linguistic processes, but I've got to also assume that they're just using linguistic processes to make themselves sound smart, and what they actually mean is, ew, it doesn't sound like I expected to. Ew. I have to just ask, what's with English? What's with the way things are spelt in English? But basically, Gaelic, well, it was Old Irish at that point, learnt how to spell from Latin, and this was 1500, 1800 years ago, learned how to spell from Latin, and used the Latin letters to represent more or less the same sounds that they were used to represent in Latin itself. So the particular linguistic process, the main linguistic process that happened to make it now sound so different from the way English speakers seem to assume that it should be pronounced based on the writing, is lenition, which is the linguistic process that basically softens the sound. You can think of sounds in terms of airflow, how much air is passing from your lungs out of your mouth or nose as you make the sound. So you've got a stop or a plosive where there's a complete blockage of your mouth cavities. No air is coming out of your mouth or nose. And this just sounds like p, d, t, k. And then you've got fricatives, which there's some air coming out. F, s, l, n. No, n is a nasal, which means there's air coming out of your nose. You've got affricates, which are, they start with a stop and become a fricative. So this sounds like ch, j. You've got approximates where there's quite a lot of air coming out. That's y, r. I'm trying to think of another one. W. So there's no contact at all between, just like a partial blockage, but there's no contact. So plosive, whatever your articulator, your tongue, usually, or your lips, and whatever is being articulated, the place of point of articulation, no air. Then a fricative, some air. Affricate, no air, and then some air. An approximate, it's a partial blockage, but they don't actually touch. And then there's vowels. So lenition is the process of basically the sound weakens or becomes softer, less contact between the articulator and the place of articulation. So this is how p becomes f, k becomes ch, b becomes v. That sort of thing is happening, and it very commonly happens between two vowels. So that occurred in a variety of places in Gaelic, in Irish, in Middle Irish. And at first, the letters were just left as they were because it was native speakers knew where these things were happening in the language. And eventually they started putting the punk shaver in there, which is the lenition dot, which was like a dot above the letter. And then when the printing press was invented, an H was put after the letter instead of the dot. So that's basically why you get MH being pronounced as V, because historically it was an and then it just lenited. So it's the same place of articulation, so we can sound more errors coming through. So that's the main thing I think that English speakers will look at and go, oh, it's not spelt, it's not pronounced like the way it's written. But even then, like, very consistently, this letter combination makes that sound, so it's no more subjective than th in English being pronounced th. It's less subjective because th in English is sometimes pronounced th and sometimes pronounced the. I'm trying to think of an instance where it's not pronounced at all, and I'm sure that happens too. The other main linguistic process is umlaut. It's umlaut, which is basically where there is a slender vowel sound, which is a high front vowel, e and e. They're called slender or high fronts because the your tongue is at the top front of your mouth, high front vowel, and this basically drags vowels that are in preceding consonants more high in front and drags nearby consonants more high in front. So this is it's umlaut when it affects other vowels, and it's palatalization when it affects consonants. And palatalization is like, in English we have game, but George. They're both a G, but J is a palatalized sound and G is not. So they've been affected by having the high front vowel next to them. And this happened in Gaelic, and we have a spelling rule that says that surrounding every consonant you've got to have either a slender, a high front vowel either side, or a broad, which is a non-high front vowel either side. So that's why you get a sort of an I maybe, or an E, or whatever, that English speakers will think, well, I can't really hear that being pronounced. But it is there because it's affecting the quality of the consonant. So yeah, I'll finish there, but that's basically the linguistic processes that occurred to take something that was using the Latin alphabet to express more or less the same sounds that the alphabet was expressing in Latin, and becomes the modern orthography that we have today. Because basically the alphabet was used throughout the whole period to write the language, and the language was changing through those two linguistic processes, and basically the orthography was adapted in some ways to reflect that. Words were spelt as different sounds dropped out. Their words were re-spelt to reflect the way they were now pronounced, but that was the basis of the orthography that we use. And it's very, very consistent. If you see a letter combination, if you hear a word, there's only one way to write it, and if you see a letter combination, then depending on the dialect you're using, there is only one correct way to pronounce it. So it's very consistent, and it is very phonetic, in as much as people use the word phonetic, because the way things are written track exactly to the way they're pronounced. It's just that we use the letters in slightly different ways to the way they're used in English. But Gaelic has been written for longer than English has existed, so yeah. My earbud's fallen out. So that's it for today. Siarad an drastic as chi mi and a